Hey guys, I'm I. Tonight we're going to dim the lights, settle in, and drift back to a time when the American dream wasn't about picket fences and two-car garages, but about sheer, unadulterated survival. Imagine, if you will. The year is something like 1620 or maybe 1630 or any year in that early colonial scramble. You're standing on a dock, the smell of salt and desperation thick in the air, gazing out at a tiny wooden vessel that looks suspiciously like a floating coffin. This isn't the cruise ship you booked on Expedia, folks. This is your one-way ticket to a new world. And let me tell you, the amenities are sparse. You've probably packed your best wool socks and a vague sense of optimism. But trust me, you're going to need a lot more than that. A lot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the creaking deck, the planks slick with sea spray and the lingering stench of unwashed bodies. The ship, perhaps a mere 100 feet long, is already teeming with humanity, a chaotic mix of hopefuls, desperados, religious zealots, and indentured servants, all crammed together like sardines in a very leaky, very smelly can. You find your designated spot, a cramped corner below deck, where the ceiling is so low you can't stand upright, and the air is already thick with the scent of stale breath, unwashed linen, and the distinct metallic tang of fear. This is your home for the next 2 to 3 months, maybe even longer if the winds decide to play hard to get. As the lines are cast off and the ship slowly pulls away from the familiar shores of England, a strange mix of relief and terror washes over you. Relief, because you're finally escaping whatever hardship or persecution drove you to this desperate gamble. Terror, because you're now entirely at the mercy of the vast, unpredictable ocean. The land recedes, a faint smudge on the horizon, until it vanishes completely, leaving you surrounded by nothing but an endless expanse of gray-green water and an equally endless sky. The first few days are a blur of seasickness. Your stomach churns relentlessly, rejecting every meager meal. The ship pitches and rolls, a relentless dance that leaves you dizzy and disoriented. You cling to anything solid, your knuckles white, as the world tilts violently around you. The constant creaking of the timbers, the groaning of the ropes, and the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull become the soundtrack to your misery. You learn quickly that privacy is a luxury you no longer possess. Every cough, every groan, every desperate dash to the rail is a public spectacle. The shared chamber pots overflow, adding another layer to the already overwhelming stench. You try to sleep, but the rocking motion and the cacophony of human suffering make it nearly impossible. You lie awake, listening to the muffled cries of children, the hacking coughs of the sick, and the soft, desperate prayers of your fellow passengers. Food, when it arrives, is a grim affair. Hardtack, a biscuit so tough it could double as a building material, is your staple. It's often infested with weevils, but you learn to pick them out or simply ignore them. Salted beef or pork, often rancid, makes a rare appearance, and water is rationed, tasting brackish and stale from the wooden casks. You quickly realize that fresh food is a distant memory. The vibrant colors of fruits and vegetables are replaced by the dull browns and grays of preserved rations. Your body begins to ache, your skin feels dry and itchy, and a dull, persistent hunger gnaws at your insides. You dream of fresh bread, crisp apples, and clean, flowing water. Disease, as you soon discover, is the true king of the Atlantic crossing. Packed so tightly, with poor sanitation and even poor nutrition, the ship becomes a breeding ground for every ailment imaginable. Dysentery sweeps through the decks like wildfire, its victims racked with debilitating cramps and relentless dehydration. Smallpox, a terrifying specter, leaves its mark on faces, often leading to blindness or death. Fevers rage, their victims delirious and burning, while others succumb to scurvy, their gums bleeding and their joints aching from a lack of fresh produce. You watch, helpless, as your fellow travelers sicken and fade. One day, a child is laughing. The next, they are still and cold, their small body wrapped in canvas and slipped silently into the depths. The ocean, a vast and indifferent maw, swallows them whole, and the journey continues, a grim procession. This common historical fact, the sheer lethality of the transatlantic voyage, is often glossed over in romanticized tales of brave pioneers. It was a gauntlet of death. The ship's crew, hardened by countless voyages, are a law unto themselves. They bark orders, their faces weathered and their eyes weary. They are the only ones who truly understand the capricious nature of the sea, and their authority is absolute. You learn to stay out of their way, to follow instructions without question, and to offer whatever small help you can when the storms inevitably arrive. And they do arrive. One afternoon, the sky darkens with an unnatural speed. The wind whips up, tearing at the sails, and the ship begins to buck and heave with terrifying force. Waves, once gentle swells, now rise like mountains, crashing over the deck, sending torrents of icy water cascading below. You are thrown from your bunk, tumbling across the floor as the ship rolls violently. The screams of the terrified mix with the roar of the wind and the thunderous crashes of the waves. You cling to a wooden beam, your muscles screaming, as the ship feels like it's being torn apart. Water pours in through every crevice, soaking your meager belongings. You spend hours, perhaps days, in this state of terror, convinced that each wave will be the one that finally sends you to the bottom. The thought of a quick, merciful end even crosses your mind. A strange comfort amidst the chaos. During one particularly violent storm, a less-known detail emerges: the ship's carpenter, a quiet man with calloused hands, spends hours below deck, not just patching leaks, but also meticulously carving small wooden tokens. He claims they are for good luck, a pagan ritual he learned from an old sailor, but you suspect it's more about keeping his own sanity intact. He offers you one, a crudely carved fish, and though you're skeptical, you clutch it tightly, finding a strange, irrational comfort in its smooth surface. It's a small, almost insignificant detail, but in the vastness of the ocean and the overwhelming despair, these tiny acts of human coping stand out. The days blend into weeks, weeks into months. Time loses its meaning. You wake, you eat or try to, you endure, you sleep or try to. The sun rises and sets, a monotonous cycle, and the horizon remains stubbornly empty of land. Your clothes are perpetually damp, your hair matted with salt and grime, and your body is a patchwork of bruises and aches. You begin to lose track of how long you've been at sea. Was it 8 weeks? 10, 100? It feels like an eternity. The social dynamics on board are fascinating, if grim. People form small cliques, sharing stories and fears, offering each other what little comfort they possess. Others retreat into themselves, their eyes vacant, their spirits broken by the relentless hardship. Arguments erupt over trivial matters: a dropped biscuit, a shared blanket, fueled by stress, hunger, and the constant proximity. Yet, there are also moments of unexpected kindness: a shared sip of precious water, a whispered word of encouragement, a hand offered to a stumbling passenger. These small acts of humanity are like tiny beacons in the overwhelming darkness. You find yourself staring out at the endless ocean, your thoughts drifting. You ponder the choices that led you here, the life you left behind, and the uncertain future that awaits. Was it worth it? The question hangs heavy in the salty air, unanswered. You think of the stories you heard back home, of a land of opportunity, of vast forests and fertile soil, of religious freedom and a chance to start anew. But the reality of this journey is a stark contrast to those hopeful visions. You realize that the romanticized image of the courageous pilgrim, bravely sailing to a new world, completely overlooks the sheer, brutal physical and psychological toll of the voyage itself. It wasn't a grand adventure, it was an endurance test. The air below deck becomes increasingly foul. The lack of ventilation, combined with the presence of so many bodies and their waste, creates a suffocating environment. The smell of sickness, fear, and unwashed humanity permeates everything. You try to breathe shallowly, to avoid inhaling the worst of it, but it's an inescapable reality. Your lungs ache, and a persistent cough develops in your chest. You wonder how much longer your body can endure this constant assault. One morning, a cry rings out from the crow's nest: "Land ho!" The words, though barely audible above the wind and waves, electrify the ship. A ripple of excitement, disbelief, and renewed hope spreads through the weary passengers. You scramble onto the deck, your legs wobbly, your eyes scanning the distant horizon, and there it is. A faint, dark smudge against the gray sky. Land. It's not the lush, verdant paradise you might have imagined, but it is land nonetheless. A collective sigh of relief sweeps through the ship, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, you see genuine smiles on the faces of your fellow travelers. As the ship draws closer, the smudge resolves into the dark green of dense forest. You see no welcoming committee, no bustling port, just an unbroken line of trees stretching as far as the eye can see. It's wild, untamed, and utterly alien. The sheer scale of it is daunting. You've left behind the familiar, cultivated landscapes of Europe for something raw and unforgiving. The initial elation gives way to a new kind of apprehension. You've survived the ocean, but now you face the wilderness. The ship finally anchors, not in a harbor, but in a sheltered cove. The water is shallower here, and the air smells different, fresher, with the scent of pine and damp earth. Small boats are lowered, and you prepare to disembark, your legs trembling with anticipation and exhaustion. As you step into the smaller boat, your feet touch something solid, and the sensation is almost overwhelming after months of constant motion. You look back at the ship, your floating prison, and feel a strange mix of gratitude and revulsion. You survived it. But at what cost? The journey across the Atlantic was a filter, a brutal culling. Many who set out never made it. They succumbed to disease, to the storms, to the sheer despair of the voyage. Those who survived were not just lucky, they were incredibly resilient. Or perhaps simply too stubborn to die. You are one of the survivors. But you carry the scars of the journey, both visible and invisible. Your body is weaker, your spirit perhaps a little harder, and your understanding of hardship profoundly deepened. Historians still debate whether the sheer mortality rate of these early voyages was primarily due to a lack of medical knowledge, the inherent dangers of sea travel, or the deliberate overcrowding and poor conditions imposed by ship owners seeking maximum profit. It's a complex question, and the answer likely involves a grim combination of all three. But for you, standing on the threshold of this new world, the reasons are less important than the stark reality of what you've just endured. You step onto the shore, your boots sinking into the wet sand. The ground feels solid, unmoving, a welcome relief after months of constant rocking. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the crisp, cool air. The trees loom over you, ancient and imposing, their branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The silence is profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the distant roar of the ocean. There are no familiar sounds of bustling markets, no church bells, no distant chatter of neighbors, just the wild. You look around at your fellow passengers, their faces pale and drawn, their clothes ragged. They are a motley crew, united only by the shared trauma of the voyage and the desperate hope for a new beginning. Children cling to their parents, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. The older men and women lean on staffs, their bodies aching, but their gazes fixed on the unknown ahead. You realize that this is just the beginning. The journey to the new world was just the first hurdle. The real challenge, the true test of your resolve, is about to begin. You've arrived, but now you have to live here. And living here, as you will soon discover, is an entirely different beast than merely surviving the journey. You recall the taste of the hardtack, the smell of the bilge, the constant fear of the storms. These memories are etched into your very being, a permanent reminder of the price you paid to reach this shore. You touch the small, crudely carved fish in your pocket, the one the carpenter gave you. It feels strangely warm, a small anchor to the human connection you found amidst the despair. You look up at the vast, unfamiliar sky, and a single thought echoes in your mind: what now? The answer, you instinctively know, will be hard-won, fraught with peril, and utterly unlike anything you've ever known. The American dream, it seems, starts with a nightmare. You're here. Now. Let the real struggle begin. You stand on the shore, the scent of pine and damp earth filling your lungs, a stark contrast to the stale, salty air of the ship. The land beneath your feet feels incredibly solid, almost unnervingly still after months of constant motion. You glance back at the ship, a dark silhouette against the vast ocean, and then turn your gaze to the towering wall of trees that looms before you. This isn't the manicured countryside of England, with its neat hedgerows and cultivated fields. This is wild, untamed, and overwhelmingly green. It's a silent, imposing giant, and you, a tiny speck at its feet, feel a sudden, profound sense of insignificance. The first task is immediate and overwhelming: establish a foothold. There's no welcome wagon, no inn with a warm fire and a soft bed. Your shelter is the open sky and the ground. Still damp from recent rains is your mattress. You and your fellow travelers, a ragged band of survivors, begin the arduous work of unloading the ship. Crates of tools, barrels of salted provisions, bundles of clothing. Each item is heavy, cumbersome, and vital to your survival. You form a human chain, passing goods hand to hand, your muscles aching with every lift. The sun, though weak in the autumn sky, feels surprisingly warm on your face, a small comfort after the perpetual dampness of the ship. Building shelter is paramount. The first structures are crude, temporary affairs, lean-tos made from branches and canvas, or simple dugouts in the earth. You learn to wield an axe, your hands quickly blistering as you hack at stubborn saplings. The sound of chopping wood echoes through the forest, a new, unfamiliar symphony. Every piece of timber, every nail, and every scrap of cloth is precious. You work from dawn until dusk, driven by the biting chill in the air and the knowledge that winter, a force far more formidable than any ocean storm, is rapidly approaching. You're building not just homes, but a bulwark against the elements, a desperate gamble against the unforgiving wilderness. The search for fresh water is one of your first priorities. The brackish ship water has left you parched, and the thought of a clear, cold stream is a powerful motivator. You follow small trickles, hoping they lead to a larger source. When you finally find a spring, its water clear and sweet, you drink deeply, the coolness a shock to your system. It's a simple pleasure, but one that feels like the greatest luxury imaginable. You realize how utterly dependent you are on the land, how every basic need must now be wrested from its grasp. As days turn into weeks, the chill in the air deepens. The leaves on the trees, once vibrant green, begin to turn to brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows. A spectacular but ominous display. You know this beauty heralds the coming cold. Winter here, you've heard, is a beast unlike anything in England. The stories speak of snow so deep it buries houses, and cold so intense it freezes rivers solid. You redouble your efforts, your movements becoming more frantic, your exhaustion a constant companion. Hunting and foraging become essential. You're not a hunter by trade, but necessity is a harsh teacher. You learn to set snares for small game, to identify edible berries and roots, and more importantly, poisonous ones. The forest, once a terrifying unknown, slowly begins to reveal its secrets, though often at a painful cost. You learn that a particular red berry might look tempting, but it'll have you running for the nearest bush faster than a politician avoids a direct question. You might even find yourself muttering, "Well, that was a very bad idea," as you desperately seek relief. The first frost arrives, a thin, shimmering layer of ice on the ground, a stark reminder of the urgency of your situation. Your hands, perpetually chapped and raw, ache with the cold. You huddle around small fires at night, the smoke stinging your eyes, but the warmth a precious commodity. Sleep is fitful, punctuated by the snapping of branches in the cold and the rustling of unseen creatures. You pull your threadbare blankets tighter, dreaming of thick wool and roaring hearths. One common historical fact often overlooked is the sheer engineering challenge of building a settlement from scratch with only rudimentary tools. It wasn't just about cutting down trees, it was about shaping them into usable planks, constructing foundations, and raising walls strong enough to withstand the elements. The early settlers, largely farmers and artisans, had to become master builders overnight, often learning by trial and error, with plenty of oops moments that probably resulted in a few bruised toes and a lot of cursing. A less-known detail you observe is the way the indigenous people, occasionally seen observing from the tree line, move through the forest with an almost ethereal silence. They seem to melt into the landscape, their knowledge of the terrain so profound it makes your clumsy attempts at navigation seem like a child's game. You notice they leave almost no trace, while your own presence feels like a clumsy, noisy intrusion. One day, you find a perfectly crafted arrowhead near a stream, its edges impossibly sharp. A silent testament to a skill level you can only dream of possessing. It's a stark reminder of how little you truly understand this land. The days shorten, and the sun hangs low in the sky, offering little warmth. The wind howls through the trees, a mournful lament. Snow begins to fall, at first a gentle dusting, then a relentless, heavy blanket. The world transforms into a monochrome landscape of white and gray. You trudge through drifts, your boots sinking deep, your legs aching with the effort. The cold seeps into your bones, a constant gnawing pain. Your fingers and toes feel perpetually numb, and you worry about frostbite, a silent, insidious enemy. Food supplies dwindle rapidly. The meager rations brought from the ship are almost gone, and the hunting has become increasingly difficult as the animals retreat deeper into the snow-covered forest. Hunger becomes a persistent, agonizing ache. You dream of food, rich and plentiful, and wake to the harsh reality of an empty stomach. You learn to stretch every morsel to make a single small fish last for days. The concept of seconds becomes a hilarious, almost cruel joke. You might even find yourself eyeing a particularly plump squirrel and thinking, well, hello there, little nugget of protein, before remembering your snares are empty. The common cold, often dismissed as a minor inconvenience in England, becomes a potentially deadly threat. A simple cough can turn into a rattling chest infection, and a fever can quickly spiral into delirium. With no doctors, no medicines beyond a few herbal remedies, and bodies weakened by malnutrition and exposure, even minor ailments can prove fatal. You nurse your fellow settlers, offering what little comfort you can, watching helplessly as some succumb to the relentless march of illness. The sheer vulnerability of human life in this harsh environment is laid bare. The psychological toll of the brutal winter is immense. The constant cold, the gnawing hunger, the isolation from the familiar world, and the ever-present threat of death weigh heavily on your spirit. Despair can be a tempting companion, whispering doubts and urging surrender. You see it in the eyes of some of your companions, a vacant stare, a slow, shuffling gait, a quiet resignation. But you also see resilience. You see people sharing their last scraps of food, offering a word of encouragement, or simply enduring, one agonizing day at a time. The human spirit, it turns out, is remarkably stubborn. You learn to read the signs of the forest, to interpret the tracks in the snow, the calls of the birds, the subtle shifts in the wind. This new knowledge, born of necessity, slowly replaces the old comforts of civilization. You are becoming a different person, stripped bare of the luxuries and conventions of your former life, molded by the raw demands of survival. Your hands are rough, your face weathered, your eyes sharper, constantly scanning, constantly assessing. The communal spirit, though strained by hardship, is vital. You rely on each other for warmth, for food, for companionship. Tasks are shared, burdens lightened by collective effort. When someone falls ill, others step in to help, knowing that their own survival might one day depend on the kindness of strangers. It's a fragile, desperate camaraderie, forged in the crucible of shared suffering. You might even find yourself bonding with someone you barely tolerated on the ship, realizing that in this new world, a shared misery makes for strange bedfellows. You're all in this together, whether you like it or not, like a very intense, very cold reality show. As the winter drags on, the death toll mounts. The graves multiply, small mounds of frozen earth marking the end of so many hopes and dreams. Each death is a blow, a reminder of your own precarious existence. You attend the simple burials, the words of prayer muffled by the biting wind, the tears freezing on your cheeks. The silence of the forest seems to deepen with each passing life, a vast, indifferent witness to your struggle. This common historical fact, the devastating mortality rates of the first colonial winters, often overshadows the incredible resilience of those who survived. Historians still debate whether the early settlers' lack of preparedness for the harsh North American winters was due to genuine ignorance of the climate, overly optimistic reports from earlier explorers, or a desperate gamble driven by the urgency of their religious or economic circumstances. It's a question that delves into the motivations and miscalculations of those who dared to cross the ocean. But for you, shivering in your crude shelter, the reasons for the cold are less important than the bone-deep reality of it. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, there are subtle signs of change. The days begin to lengthen, almost imperceptibly at first. The sun, though still weak, seems to linger a little longer in the sky. The snow, once a solid, unyielding blanket, begins to soften, its surface glistening with meltwater. The sound of dripping water, a welcome change from the howling wind, becomes a new melody. Hope, a fragile, almost forgotten emotion, begins to stir within you. The first green shoots of spring emerge from the thawing earth, tiny miracles of life pushing through the remnants of winter's grip. You see them, and a profound sense of relief washes over you. Survival, it seems, is still possible. The brutal welcome of the wilderness has tested you, pushed you to your limits, and stripped away every illusion. You are no longer the same person who stepped off that ship. You are harder, more resourceful, and profoundly changed by the crucible of the first winter. You have faced the raw, untamed power of nature, and, against all odds, you have endured. But the wilderness is not done with you yet. There are new challenges, new threats, and new lessons waiting in the vast green expanse that surrounds your tiny, fragile settlement. Spring arrives, a tentative promise after the brutal embrace of winter. The snow recedes, revealing a landscape still scarred by the cold, but alive with the faint stirrings of new growth. The air, though still crisp, carries the scent of thawing earth and nascent life. You feel a surge of hope, a fragile bloom in your weary heart. You've survived the cold, the hunger, the sheer physical demands of building a new life from nothing. But as the ground thaws, another, far more insidious enemy begins to stir, one that cares nothing for your resilience or your prayers. This enemy is invisible, relentless, and utterly merciless disease. You notice it first in the subtle changes: a persistent cough that lingers in the chest, a fever that flickers in the eyes, a general malaise that saps strength and spirit. It starts subtly, perhaps with a child, or an elderly settler, their bodies already weakened by the voyage and the harsh winter. You tell yourself it's just the lingering effects of the cold, a common ailment. But then more people fall ill. The coughs become more frequent, the fevers more intense, the weakness more profound. A chilling realization begins to dawn. This is something far more serious than a winter chill. The first cases are often dismissed as simple colds or agues, familiar ailments from back home. But these are not the same. The symptoms are more severe, the progression faster, the outcome often fatal. You witness the rapid decline of once strong individuals. One day, a man is working in the fields, his back bent with effort. The next, he is confined to his crude bed, his body racked with tremors, his skin burning to the touch. You try to help by offering what little comfort you can, a cool cloth to a fevered brow, a sip of precious water, but your efforts feel futile against an enemy you cannot see, cannot understand. Dysentery, the dreaded bloody flux, makes a horrifying return. Its victims are racked with agonizing cramps, relentless diarrhea, and rapid dehydration. The communal latrines, crude pits dug in the earth, become vectors for the disease, spreading it with terrifying efficiency through the close-knit settlement. The stench is unbearable, a constant reminder of the suffering. You try to maintain what little hygiene you can, boiling water, washing hands. But it feels like a losing battle against an invisible tide. You watch as strong men and women waste away, their bodies becoming skeletal, their eyes hollow with pain. Then comes the smallpox. This is the true terror, a disease whose name alone strikes fear into the hearts of all who have witnessed its devastation. It begins with a fever, a headache, and then the telltale rash. Small red spots that quickly blossom into pustules, covering the entire body. The pain is excruciating, the disfigurement horrifying. Those who survive are often left blind, scarred, or disfigured, their lives irrevocably altered. You see the fear in the eyes of your neighbors, a primal terror that transcends even the fear of starvation or attack. This common historical fact, the devastating impact of European diseases on Native American populations, is well known, but its equally brutal effect on the settlers themselves is often understated. The diseases didn't discriminate. With no doctors, no understanding of germ theory, and only a handful of rudimentary herbal remedies, your options are desperately limited. You rely on folk cures, passed down through generations, on prayer, and on the sheer, desperate hope that the illness will pass. You boil concoctions of bark and leaves, hoping for a miracle. You sit by the bedsides of the dying, whispering prayers, holding their hands as their breath grows shallow. The sound of weeping becomes a familiar lament in the settlement, a constant backdrop to the struggle for survival. A less-known detail you observe is the strange, almost ritualistic way some of the older women in the community try to ward off the disease. They hang bundles of pungent herbs above doorways, believing the scent will purify the air. They wear small bags of camphor around their necks, convinced it will repel the sickness. While these practices offer no real protection against the virulent pathogens, they provide a desperate sense of control in a situation that is utterly overwhelming. It's a poignant testament to the human need to find meaning and agency, even in the face of incomprehensible tragedy. The children are particularly vulnerable. Their small bodies, already weakened by malnutrition, succumb quickly to the onslaught of disease. You see mothers weeping over their lifeless infants, fathers burying their young sons and daughters, their faces etched with unbearable grief. The laughter of children, once a rare but joyous sound, fades from the settlement, replaced by a haunting silence. The future of your colony, already precarious, seems to dwindle with each tiny coffin lowered into the earth. It's enough to make you wonder if you've escaped one hell just to land in another. Equally brutal one? You might even find yourself thinking, well, this is just sick. A dark chuckle escaping your lips. The sheer speed of the outbreaks is terrifying. One day, a family is healthy. The next, half of them are laid low. The healthy are overwhelmed, struggling to care for the sick, to bury the dead, and to maintain the basic functions of the settlement. There are simply not enough hands to do all the work. Fields lie untended, houses unfinished, as the living dedicate their meager strength to nursing the dying. The concept of a normal day vanishes, replaced by a relentless cycle of illness, death, and grief. The psychological impact of this constant exposure to sickness and death is profound. You live with a pervasive sense of dread, never knowing who will be next, or if you yourself will succumb. Every cough, every ache, every moment of fatigue sends a jolt of fear through you. You become hyper-aware of your own body, scrutinizing every sensation, every minor discomfort. Sleep offers little respite, often filled with nightmares of fevered faces and silent burials. The joy of surviving the winter is quickly overshadowed by the grim reality of the plague that now stalks your community. The communal spirit, so vital during the winter, is severely tested. While many rally to help the sick, others, consumed by fear, withdraw, isolating themselves in desperate attempts to avoid contagion. Accusations of divine punishment or witchcraft sometimes surface, as people desperately seek explanations for the inexplicable devastation. The bonds of community, forged in hardship, begin to fray under the relentless pressure of death. One particularly grim detail, the sheer number of deaths often meant that proper burials were impossible. Bodies were sometimes interred in mass graves, or even left unburied for a time, simply wrapped in shrouds, due to the overwhelming number of sick and the weakened state of the survivors. The dignity of death, a small comfort in times of peace, was often denied in the face of such widespread calamity. You might remember the carpenter who carved the wooden fish. He's now spending his days carving simple wooden markers, a grim testament to his new, unintended trade. The indigenous populations, who have lived on this land for millennia, possess a wealth of knowledge about local plants and their medicinal properties. While your European remedies prove largely ineffective, you sometimes observe them using specific herbs or practices that seem to alleviate symptoms, though you don't fully understand their methods. There's a stark contrast between your helplessness and their apparent resilience, a gap in knowledge that feels vast and unbridgeable. This difference in medical understanding would become a point of both conflict and occasional cooperation between settlers and Native Americans. Historians still debate whether the early settlers' susceptibility to these diseases was primarily due to their weakened state from the voyage and malnutrition, their lack of natural immunity to local pathogens, or the sheer density of their settlements, which facilitated rapid transmission. It's a complex interplay of factors, and the answer likely varies depending on the specific disease and settlement. But for you, watching your friends and family sicken and die, the academic debates feel distant and irrelevant compared to the immediate, agonizing reality. As the spring turns to summer, the diseases, though still present, begin to wane in their intensity. The hot weather, perhaps, or the gradual development of some collective immunity, slowly turns the tide. The number of new cases decreases, and the recovery rate begins to improve. A fragile sense of relief settles over the decimated community. You look around at the faces of the survivors, gaunt and weary, but alive. You are fewer in number, perhaps half or even less of those who arrived on the ship. The silence in the settlement is palpable, a constant reminder of those who are gone. The experience leaves an indelible mark. You have witnessed death on a scale you never imagined possible, faced a foe against which your strength, your faith, and your ingenuity were largely powerless. You have learned that the wilderness is not just about bears and harsh winters. It is also about the microscopic enemies that can decimate a community faster than any blizzard or famine. The land, it seems, has its own ways of weeding out the weak, of testing the resolve of those who dare to claim it. You walk through the small, growing graveyard, the wooden markers a silent testament to the lives lost. Each name, each date, represents a story cut short, a dream unfulfilled. You think of the promises made back in England, the visions of a prosperous new life. The reality has been a brutal awakening, a relentless struggle against forces both seen and unseen. You are a survivor, Sapiba, but your survival has come at an immense cost. The innocence, the naivete you might have carried across the ocean has been stripped away, replaced by a grim pragmatism and a profound understanding of human vulnerability. The summer months bring a brief respite, a chance to rebuild, to plant crops, to gather strength. But the memory of the plague lingers, a dark cloud on the horizon, a constant reminder that the invisible enemy could return at any time. You learn to live with this uncertainty, to cherish each day, to find joy in the smallest comforts. The land continues to demand its tribute, and you, the weary settler, continue to pay it, hoping that one day, the promise of this new world will finally outweigh its devastating realities. You're still here, still fighting, still breathing, and that, in itself, feels like a miracle. The summer months, a brief reprieve from the ravages of disease, allow you to rebuild, to plant what little crops you can, and to gather a semblance of strength. The sun, high in the sky, warms your aching bones, and the forest, now lush and green, seems less menacing than it did in the grip of winter. You are fewer in number, the faces of the lost a constant, aching presence. But those who remain are hardened, more resilient. You've faced death in many forms, and you're still here. But as you expand your small settlement, clearing more land, building more permanent structures, you become increasingly aware that you are not alone in this vast wilderness. You've seen them before. Fleeting glimpses at the edge of the tree-lined silent figures, moving with an almost supernatural grace, their eyes observing your clumsy efforts. They are the land's original inhabitants, the Native Americans, and your initial encounters with them are a delicate dance of curiosity, suspicion, and tentative communication. You've heard stories back home of both noble savages and bloodthirsty heathens, but the reality is far more complex, far more human. The first direct encounter is often a moment of profound tension. Perhaps a small group of them emerges from the forest, not with weapons drawn, but with an air of quiet assessment. They are unlike anyone you've ever seen, their skin a rich, earthy tone, their hair dark and often braided, adorned with feathers or beads. Their clothing is made from animal hides, intricately worked, and they carry bows and arrows, or spears, with an easy familiarity that speaks of a lifetime in the wild. You stand frozen, your hand instinctively reaching for the axe at your side, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. They speak in a language utterly alien to your ears, a series of guttural sounds and melodic intonations that convey nothing but their presence. Through gestures, through pointing and miming, a fragile exchange begins. They might offer you corn, or furs, or a strange, sweet syrup from trees. You, in turn, might offer them iron tools, an axe head, a knife, a metal pot, items of immense value to them, far superior to their stone or bone equivalents. These early exchanges are often driven by mutual need. You need food and knowledge of the land. They desire your manufactured goods. There's a brief, almost idyllic period of cautious peace, a time when both sides see the potential for benefit and cooperation. You might even find yourself thinking, well, this is going surprisingly well. Maybe we can all just get along. You learn a few words, simple greetings, names of objects. They teach you about the local plants, which are edible, which are poisonous. They show you how to plant corn in mounds, how to fertilize the soil with fish, a technique far more effective than your European methods. You marvel at their deep understanding of the land, their ability to live in harmony with its rhythms, to extract its bounty without destroying it. Their knowledge of the forest is encyclopedic, their tracking skills uncanny. They can move through the densest undergrowth without a sound, leaving no trace, while you stumble and crash, announcing your presence with every clumsy step. This common historical fact, the initial period of cooperation and mutual aid between some early settlers and Native American tribes, is crucial. It wasn't always immediate conflict. Often there was a period of learning and exchange, vital for the survival of the early colonies. The Wampanoag and the Pilgrims, for instance, famously shared knowledge that allowed the Pilgrims to survive. However, this fragile peace is built on a foundation of fundamental misunderstandings and conflicting worldviews. You come from a culture that believes in private land ownership, in fences and deeds and boundaries. They, on the other hand, view land as something to be used by all, a sacred trust, not a commodity to be bought and sold. When you purchase land from them for a few trinkets, you believe you have acquired it permanently. They, however, often believe they are simply granting you permission to use it, to share its bounty, not to exclude them from it forever. This fundamental difference in understanding of land tenure would become a major source of friction. A less-known detail you observe is their profound respect for the natural world. Before felling a tree or hunting an animal, they often perform a small ritual, a quiet prayer or offering, as if asking permission from the spirit of the forest. You, with your European mindset of conquering and taming nature, find this puzzling, almost superstitious. But as you watch them, you begin to glimpse a deeper connection, a reverence for the earth that is entirely absent from your own cultural upbringing. You might even find yourself mimicking their quiet gestures before you chop down a tree. Just in case. After all, what's the harm in being polite to a tree? As your settlement grows, so does your need for land. You clear more forests, build more houses, plant more crops. Each new field, each new fence, encroaches further into the hunting grounds and traditional territories of the Native Americans. They see their resources dwindling, their way of life threatened. The initial gifts of corn and furs become less frequent, replaced by wary glances and increasingly tense encounters. You begin to feel their resentment, a silent pressure building around your small outpost. The trade relationship also begins to shift. While they initially valued your metal tools, they quickly become dependent on them. Your muskets, though primitive, are far more effective for hunting and warfare than their bows and arrows. Your blankets and cloth are warmer than their hides. This dependency, however, comes at a cost. Their traditional skills begin to atrophy, and their self-sufficiency erodes. They become increasingly reliant on your goods, creating an imbalance of power that breeds resentment and vulnerability. The cultural differences, once a source of fascination, become a source of friction. Your religious beliefs, your strict moral codes, your insistence on civilizing them, clash with their own spiritual practices and societal norms. You see their communal living as primitive, their lack of formal government as chaotic. They see your rigid hierarchy, your obsession with material possessions, and your constant desire to expand as baffling and ultimately destructive. Misunderstandings fester, small slights escalate into larger conflicts, and the initial goodwill begins to evaporate like morning mist. You hear stories, whispers from the edge of the forest, of raids on isolated homesteads, of stolen livestock, of skirmishes over hunting grounds. The fear that once focused on disease and starvation now shifts to the unseen threat lurking just beyond your palisade. You begin to arm yourselves, to organize watches, to live with a constant sense of vigilance. The sound of a snapping twig in the night sends a jolt of adrenaline through you. Every shadow seems to hide a potential enemy. The concept of justice also differs wildly. When one of your settlers is killed, no, you demand retribution, an eye for an eye. When one of their people is killed, they may seek revenge in a way that seems inexplicable to you, targeting someone unrelated to the initial offense, but part of the offending group. These cycles of vengeance, fueled by cultural differences and a lack of clear communication, quickly spiral out of control, transforming isolated incidents into broader conflicts. Historians still debate whether the escalation of conflict was inevitable due to irreconcilable cultural differences and resource competition, or if specific actions and policies by both sides could have led to a more peaceful coexistence. It's a complex question, with no easy answers, and the blame, if it can be assigned, is rarely one-sided. But for you living through it, the inevitability feels painfully real. One particularly grim common historical fact, the introduction of alcohol by European traders, had a devastating effect on many Native American communities. Not only did it lead to addiction and social disruption, but it was also often used as a tool of exploitation, with land and resources traded for cheap spirits. You witnessed the tragic consequences firsthand, seeing once proud warriors reduced to drunken stupor, their families suffering. It's a chilling example of how European gifts could become instruments of destruction. The peace, once tentative, now fades into outright hostility. Skirmishes become more frequent, more violent. Your settlement becomes a fortress, your fields a battleground. You learn to fight, to defend your home, your family, your meager possessions. The axe you once used to clear land now becomes a weapon. The musket, once a tool for hunting, is now loaded with shot, ready for human targets. You are no longer just settlers, you are soldiers, constantly on guard, constantly prepared for the next attack. The fear of the unknown, of the savages lurking in the woods, is actively cultivated by some leaders, used to unite the disparate settlers against a common enemy. Stories of atrocities, real and imagined, spread like wildfire, fueling hatred and justifying violence. The humanity of the Native Americans, once glimpsed in those early cautious exchanges, becomes obscured by fear and propaganda. They are no longer individuals. They are the enemy, a faceless threat to your survival. You find yourself participating in raids while you're defending against them, your hands stained with the dirt of this new land and perhaps the blood of its original inhabitants. The line between right and wrong blurs in the desperate struggle for survival. You justify your actions by telling yourself that it's for your family, for your community, for the future. But in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline fades, a cold knot of unease forms in your stomach. Is this what you came here for? Is this the new world you dreamed of? It's the new world? The landscape itself becomes a symbol of the conflict. The cleared fields, once a sign of progress, are now a stark demarcation line, a boundary between two worlds that are increasingly at odds. The forest, once a source of resources and mystery, is now a place of danger, where unseen eyes watch your every move. You learn to fear the silence, to distrust the rustling of leaves, to expect an ambush around every bend in the trail. The dream of peaceful coexistence, if it ever truly existed, shatters under the weight of conflicting desires, cultural chasms, and the relentless pressure of expansion. The land, which once offered the promise of new beginnings, now seems to demand a terrible price in blood and suffering. You are caught in a conflict that seems to have no end, a struggle for dominance over a land that belongs to no one, yet is claimed by all. You remember the initial curiosity, the shared knowledge, the fleeting moments of understanding. Those memories now seem distant, almost naive, overshadowed by the bitterness and violence that have come to define your relationship with the indigenous people. The hope of a new Eden, a place of peace and freedom, has been replaced by the grim reality of a frontier constantly on edge, where survival means constant vigilance and often brutal conflict. The dream of a new world is slowly turning into a nightmare of your own making. The fragile peace with the indigenous people has shattered, replaced by a constant, low-level hum of anxiety and the occasional sharp crack of a musket. You've learned to sleep with one eye open, to listen to the sounds of the forest with a new kind of vigilance. But even as the threat of conflict looms, another, more intimate enemy begins to tighten its grip. One that gnaws at your insides with a relentless, agonizing persistence hunger. The first winter was a brutal lesson in scarcity, But that was merely a taste of what was to come. You managed to survive, bruised and battered, on meager rations and whatever game you could snare. Nah, with the growing population of your settlement and the increasing hostility of the native tribes, securing enough food becomes a desperate, daily struggle. The fields you've cleared, though diligently planted with corn and other crops, are never quite enough. The soil is unfamiliar, the weather unpredictable, and the pests relentless. You watch your precious seedlings with a mixture of hope and dread, knowing that your very lives depend on their success. Harvest time, which should be a period of abundance and relief, often brings only a partial reprieve. The corn, though a staple, is not enough to sustain everyone through the long, cold months ahead. You meticulously gather every ear, every kernel, knowing that a single dropped grain could mean the difference between survival and starvation for someone. The communal storehouse, once a symbol of hope, now seems pitifully small, its contents dwindling faster than they are replenished. You see the worried glances exchanged between the leaders, the furrowed brows as they tally the meager provisions. Hunting, once a supplementary activity, becomes a desperate necessity. You venture further into the increasingly dangerous forest, your musket heavy in your hands, your eyes scanning for any sign of game. Deer, bear, turkey, any animal is a potential meal. But the game is wily and the forest is vast. Hours, sometimes days, pass without a successful hunt, and you return to the settlement empty-handed, your stomach rumbling, your spirit deflated. The common historical fact of the early settlers' dependence on hunting and its inherent unreliability is often overlooked. It wasn't a leisure activity. It was a life-or-death pursuit that often failed. Fishing offers another avenue, but the rivers and streams are not always bountiful, and the weather can be treacherous. You spend hours by the water's edge, shivering in the cold, your hands numb, hoping for a bite. Sometimes you're lucky, pulling in a few small fish that provide a temporary respite from the hunger. Other times, you return with nothing but the chill in your bones and the bitter taste of disappointment. You might even try to tell yourself, well, at least I got some exercise, as your stomach growls in protest. Foraging for wild edibles becomes a constant activity. You learn to identify native plants, roots, and berries, supplementing your diet with whatever the wilderness provides. But this knowledge is hard-won, often through trial and error, and the risk of consuming something poisonous is ever present. You recall the lessons from the first year, the painful consequences of misidentification. Every new plant is approached with extreme caution, a silent prayer offered before you risk a taste. The children, their bellies perpetually empty, are often the most eager foragers, their small hands eagerly searching for anything edible. The concept of food security is utterly alien. You live from harvest to harvest, from hunt to hunt, always on the brink. A late frost, a prolonged drought, an early winter storm, any of these natural events can spell disaster, pushing your community closer to the edge. You learn to hoard, to ration, to stretch every scrap of food as far as it can possibly go. A single small potato becomes a precious commodity. A piece of dried fish, a luxury. The psychological impact of constant hunger is profound. It's not just a physical ache, it's a pervasive mental fog, a dulling of the senses, a constant obsession. Your thoughts revolve around food, what to eat, when to eat, how to get more. You dream of feasts, of overflowing tables, of rich, savory meals, and wake to the harsh reality of an empty stomach and the gnawing pain. Your energy levels plummet, making even simple tasks feel monumental. Your temper shortens, and small disagreements can quickly escalate into heated arguments over scarce resources. A less-known detail is the desperate measures some settlers resorted to during extreme famine. Stories, whispered in hushed tones, speak of eating shoe leather, boiling tree bark for sustenance, or even, in the most dire circumstances, consuming the bodies of the dead. These are the dark secrets of survival, the unimaginable extremes to which human beings can be pushed when starvation becomes the only reality. You hear a story about a man who claimed to have eaten his own hat, and you can't tell if it's a grim joke or a horrifying truth. The children suffer the most. Their small bodies are less resilient, their need for nourishment more urgent. You see their ribs showing through their thin clothing, their eyes wide and listless. Their cries of hunger are a constant, heartbreaking sound, a torment to parents who have nothing left to give. The mortality rate among children, already high due to disease, is further exacerbated by chronic malnutrition. It's a silent tragedy, played out in every struggling household. The threat of famine also fuels conflict with the Native Americans. As your hunting grounds shrink and your crops fail, you are forced to encroach further into their territories, leading to increased skirmishes and raids. The fight for land becomes, at its core, a fight for food. Both sides are desperate. Both are struggling to survive. And the competition for limited resources inevitably leads to violence. The initial exchanges of knowledge and goods are long forgotten, replaced by a brutal struggle for existence. The concept of waste becomes anathema. Every scrap of food is utilized, every bone boiled for broth, every discarded part of an animal rendered down for fat. You learn to be incredibly resourceful, to make do with what little you have, to transform seemingly inedible items into something that can sustain life. You become a master of making something out of nothing, a culinary alchemist of desperation. The social fabric of the community is strained by the constant hunger. While some share what little they have, others hoard, driven by a primal instinct for self-preservation. Trust erodes and suspicion grows. The bonds of community, so vital for survival, are tested by the relentless pressure of an empty stomach. You see the desperate glint in people's eyes when food is mentioned, a stark reminder of the animalistic urges that lie just beneath the surface of civilization. Historians still debate whether the early settlers' persistent struggles with hunger were primarily due to their unfamiliarity with the North American environment and agricultural methods, the disruption caused by conflicts with Native Americans, or simply the inherent difficulties of establishing a self-sufficient colony in a wilderness. It's a complex web of factors, and the answer likely varies depending on the specific settlement and period. But for you, living through it, the reasons are less important than the gnawing, ever-present pain of an empty belly. The winter months are particularly brutal. The ground is frozen, hunting is nearly impossible, and the meager harvest has already been consumed. You spend days huddled by the fire, conserving what little energy you have, dreaming of the spring and the promise of new growth. Your body becomes accustomed to a state of semi-starvation, your metabolism slowing, your movements deliberate and slow. You feel like a shadow of your former self, a ghost haunting your own bones. You might even try to make a joke. I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse. And then it's Ryder. But the laughter is hollow, tinged with genuine desperation. The children, if they survive the winter, emerge frail and stunted, their growth permanently affected by the lack of proper nutrition. The long-term health consequences of this chronic hunger are severe, weakening bodies and making them more susceptible to disease. The cycle of hardship continues, passed down from one generation to the next, a grim inheritance of the early colonial experience. The arrival of a supply ship from England, though infrequent and unreliable, is a cause for immense celebration. The sight of its sails on the horizon sends a wave of joyous relief through the settlement. The fresh provisions, though often limited, are a lifeline, a temporary reprieve from the constant struggle. You gorge yourself on the unfamiliar tastes of flour, dried fruit, and salted meat, savoring every bite, knowing that this abundance is fleeting. But the relief is always temporary. The ship departs, and the cycle of scarcity begins anew. You are constantly aware of your isolation, of the vast ocean that separates you from the comforts and certainties of the old world. You are on your own, dependent on the land, on your own ingenuity, and on the strength of your community. And the land, though beautiful, is also unforgiving, demanding a constant tribute of toil and suffering. The justifications for this abhorrent practice begin to circulate, whispered at first, then openly proclaimed. They are heathens, it is argued, uncivilized, and bringing them to this Christian land, even in bondage, is a form of salvation. Their skin color, their perceived inferiority, is used as a convenient excuse to strip them of their humanity and deny them basic rights. You hear sermons from the pulpit, twisting scripture to support the notion that God ordained their servitude. You see pamphlets distributed, filled with racist caricatures and false narratives, designed to assuage the consciences of those who profit from this trade. Historians still debate whether the intense internal strife within early colonial settlements was an inevitable consequence of bringing together diverse groups under extreme pressure, or if it was exacerbated by the authoritarian nature of their leadership and the rigid social structures they attempted to impose. It's a chicken and egg question, with no easy answer, but the suffering it caused was undeniably real. Surveillance was constant. Neighbors watched neighbors, and everyone was encouraged to report any wrongdoing. There was no concept of privacy in the modern sense. Your home, your life, were all part of a community, and everyone had a vested interest in ensuring that you followed the rules. You felt the eyes of others constantly on you, an invisible but relentless pressure. Gossip and rumor are powerful weapons in this confined society. A whispered word, a knowing glance, can destroy a reputation, ruin a life. Without newspapers or widespread communication, information travels by word of mouth, often distorted and exaggerated. You learn to be wary of what you hear, and even more wary of what you say. The fear of being the subject of malicious gossip is a constant pressure, forcing you to guard your words and actions carefully. You might even wish for a mute button on some of your more gossipy neighbors. A less known detail you observe is the subtle but deliberate way their identities are stripped away. Their names are often changed to something more English or Christian, their languages suppressed, their cultural practices forbidden. They are forced to adopt new customs, new religions, new ways of being, all designed to sever their ties to their heritage and make them more compliant. You see them trying to hold onto fragments of their past, a whispered song, a hidden charm, but the pressure to conform is immense. It's a quiet violence, just as devastating as the physical chains. The legal system, though intended to maintain order, often becomes a tool for settling personal scores or enforcing the will of the powerful. Trials are public spectacles, designed to serve as both punishment and deterrent. You see individuals dragged before the magistrates, their reputations already ruined by public opinion, their fate often sealed before a single word of testimony is heard. Justice, in this harsh environment, is often swift and unforgiving, and sometimes deeply flawed. Trivial offenses that in England might be lightly punished or overlooked were punished severely here. Slandering others, spreading rumors, or even being lazy in public work could all result in public shaming. You might see someone forced to stand on a wooden platform, with a sign stating their crime hanging around their neck, enduring the ridicule and humiliation of the community. The cold of contempt was colder than the harshest winter. The psychological toll of this internal discord is significant. You live with a constant sense of unease, never truly knowing who you can trust. The bonds of friendship and family are tested by the pervasive suspicion. The dream of a harmonious community, united by faith and common purpose, slowly dissolves into a grim reality of factionalism and mistrust. You feel a profound sense of loneliness, even surrounded by so many people, as genuine connection becomes increasingly difficult. The labor demanded of them is relentless and brutal. They are put to work in the fields, clearing land, planting crops, enduring the scorching summer sun and the biting winter cold. They build houses, roads, and fortifications, their sweat and toil literally laying the foundations of the new colony. They are worked from dawn until dusk, with meager food and inadequate shelter. The whip, or the threat of it, is a constant companion, a stark reminder of their powerlessness. You see the raw welts on their backs, the exhaustion in their eyes, and the quiet defiance that sometimes flickers there. The children, growing up in this environment, learn quickly to navigate the complex social landscape. They witness the public shaming, the accusations, the banishments. They learn to be cautious, to conform, to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Their childhoods are shaped not only by the external dangers of the wilderness, but also by the internal conflicts of their own community. Trials were often swift and unforgiving. There was little room for excuses or doubt. Evidence is often eyewitness testimony, and confessions, whether coerced or not, are considered strong evidence. You witness these trials, where a person's fate can be decided in a matter of hours, and the sentences are often harsh. The constant need for vigilance against external threats often forces a temporary truce in internal disputes. When Native American raids occur, or when a new disease sweeps through the settlement, the community is momentarily united against a common enemy. But as soon as the immediate danger passes, the old resentments and rivalries resurface, like weeds pushing through cracked pavement. The laws begin to solidify, codifying their status as property. They are not citizens, not even servants. They are chattel, movable goods, to be bought, sold, inherited, or mortgaged. They have no legal rights, no recourse against abuse, no voice in their own destiny. A master can do as he pleases with his property, and the law will uphold his right to do so. You witness instances of extreme cruelty, knowing that there is no justice for the enslaved, no one to hear their pleas. You look at the faces around you, the same faces you saw on the ship, the same faces that endured the first winter with you. You shared so much, suffered so much together. Yet, here you are, divided by beliefs, by ambitions, by the petty grievances of daily life. The strength of the community, once its greatest asset, is now its most vulnerable point. In a dangerous environment where every survivor is a valuable asset, chaos is a deadly threat. So from the very beginning, your leaders, often devout men with strong wills and a firm belief in divine retribution, have established a strict set of laws and rules. These are not the soft, easygoing laws you might have been accustomed to in older English towns. These are rules designed to ensure the survival of the community, and they are enforced ruthlessly. The dream of a perfect society, a city upon a hill free from the corruption of the old world, proves to be an impossible ideal. Human flaws, power dynamics, and the relentless pressure of survival inevitably lead to discord. Even in the most devout and well-intentioned communities, you are forced to confront the disturbing reality that even in the pursuit of a new beginning, the old problems of human nature persist, casting a long shadow over the promise of this nascent nation. The presence of enslaved people creates a new social hierarchy within the colony. You, as a white settler, even if you are poor or an indentured servant yourself, are always above them. This shared racial identity, even across class lines, begins to bind the white community together, creating a sense of superiority that justifies the exploitation of others. It's a subtle but powerful shift, cementing racial divisions that will endure for centuries. You have navigated the treacherous waters of the Atlantic, survived the brutal embrace of the wilderness, battled the invisible enemy of disease, endured the gnawing pangs of hunger, and grappled with both external conflicts and internal discord. Through it all, you have been a witness and a participant in the most profound transformation of this new world, the reshaping of the wild itself. The pristine ancient landscape you first encountered is slowly, irrevocably, bending to your will, becoming something new, something that reflects your presence and your relentless drive to survive. Fear is a powerful tool for maintaining order. Fear of public humiliation, fear of physical pain, and fear of being expelled from the community are all powerful motivators for conformity. You learn to hold yourself back, to speak carefully, to act in a way that is expected of you by society. You become part of this machine, a small cog in the disciplinary machine. You might think, surely there is an application for this, where you can like or dislike people's behavior. From the moment you stepped onto these shores, your primary goal was to tame the wild. The towering forests, once a source of both awe and terror, became a resource to be exploited, an obstacle to be overcome. The rhythmic sound of axes biting into wood, once a novelty, is now a constant, relentless symphony. Trees that have stood for centuries, perhaps millennia, fall with a resounding crash, their ancient lives ending to make way for your burgeoning settlement. You are a lumberjack, a builder, a farmer, all rolled into one, driven by the desperate need for shelter, warmth, and arable land. Historians still debate whether the development of chattel slavery in the American colonies was a preordained outcome of economic necessity, a direct import of existing European practices, or a gradual, opportunistic response to labor shortages and racial prejudices. It's a complex and uncomfortable question, and the answer likely involves a combination of these factors evolving over time. But for you, watching it unfold, it feels like a dark tide rising, engulfing the very ideals of freedom and opportunity that drew you here. The cleared land, raw and scarred, is then put to the plow. Your European farming methods, though initially ill-suited to the unfamiliar soil and climate, are adapted through trial and error, and sometimes through lessons learned from the very indigenous people you are displacing. You break the earth, turning over centuries of untouched topsoil, preparing it for your seeds. The fields expand year by year, pushing further and further into the forest, a visible testament to your relentless expansion. This common historical fact, the rapid deforestation of early America for agriculture and settlement, profoundly altered the landscape. A well-known but often underappreciated historical fact is the presence of blue laws in the early colonies, especially in New England. These laws strictly regulated moral and religious behavior, prohibiting activities such as gambling, dancing, drinking on Sundays, and even laughing loudly in public. Life had little joy or entertainment, and everything had to be in service of work and the worship of God. Stealing, whether it was a piece of bread or a tool, was considered a serious crime. In a society where everything was scarce, taking from another was not only a violation of the law, but also a betrayal of everyone's survival. Punishments included flogging, cutting off an ear, or even hanging if the crime was serious enough or repeated. You witnessed these punishments, a chilling reminder to everyone of the consequences of breaking the rules. The introduction of European crops fundamentally changes the ecosystem. Wheat, barley, rye, these grains, alien to this continent, begin to replace the native flora. Your livestock, cattle, pigs, sheep, roam freely, their hooves compacting the soil, their grazing habits altering the undergrowth, and their diseases sometimes spreading to native animal populations. The balance of nature, undisturbed for countless generations, is thrown into disarray by your presence. You might even find yourself thinking, well, we certainly know how to make an impact, don't we? You see the children of the enslaved, born into bondage, their futures predetermined from the moment of their birth. They play alongside your own children, perhaps for a brief innocent period. But the stark reality of their different destinies quickly becomes apparent. You witness the casual cruelty of their upbringing, the early lessons in obedience and subservience, the constant reminders of their place in this brutal system. It's a heartbreaking sight, a perpetuation of injustice that seems to have no end. You build fences, miles and miles of them, meticulously crafted from the very trees you felled. These fences are not just for keeping your livestock in, they are also for keeping the wild out, and for marking your claim on the land. They are physical manifestations of your concept of private property, a stark contrast to the indigenous understanding of communal land use. Each fence post hammered into the earth is a declaration, a line drawn in the sand, asserting your ownership over a piece of this vast wilderness. Even leaders are not completely immune. Although they have great power, they must also adhere to the moral and religious principles they have established. A scandal or serious misconduct could cost them their power and prestige. Although they rarely face the public punishments that ordinary people faced, the rivers and streams, once pristine and teeming with fish, are now harnessed for your needs. You build small dams to power grist mills, diverting water for irrigation, and using them as routes for trade and transportation. The natural flow of the waterways is altered, their ecosystems subtly, or not so subtly, disrupted. The sound of rushing water, once solely natural, now carries the added hum of human industry. The fear of rebellion is ever present among the white settlers. Whispers of uprisings, real or imagined, spread quickly, leading to even harsher laws and more brutal punishments. Enslaved people are forbidden from gathering in large groups, from learning to read or write, from possessing weapons. Patrols are organized, their purpose to hunt down runaways and suppress any signs of dissent. The tension is palpable, a constant undercurrent beneath the surface of daily life. A less-known detail you observe is the subtle but significant impact of your discarded waste. Unlike the indigenous people who leave almost no trace, your settlement generates refuse, broken tools, ceramic shards, animal bones, and human waste. These accumulate, slowly but surely, forming nascent middens and altering the very chemistry of the soil around your dwellings. Future archaeologists will one day dig through these layers, piecing together the story of your early, messy existence. You might even find yourself muttering, well, that's certainly not going to biodegrade overnight, is it? You look at your hands, calloused and scarred, and at the faces of your fellow settlers, etched with lines of hardship and resilience. You have survived hunger, but it has left its mark, a deep understanding of what it means to truly want, to truly suffer for sustenance. The food you eat, when you have it, is savored, appreciated in a way that those who have never known true hunger can never understand. Every meal is a victory, every full belly a blessing. The native wildlife, once abundant, begins to retreat or diminish. Deer, bears, wolves, creatures that once roamed freely, find their habitats shrinking, their food sources altered, and their lives increasingly threatened by your hunting and expansion. Some species, unable to adapt, begin to disappear from areas where they once thrived. The balance of predator and prey shifts, and the intricate web of life that existed before your arrival is slowly unraveled. You might find yourself questioning the morality of it all in the quiet hours of the night. Is this truly the city upon a hill? The beacon of freedom and righteousness that was promised? The ideals of liberty and opportunity, which drew you across the ocean, seem to crumble in the face of this profound injustice. The cognitive dissonance is jarring. How can a society founded on the pursuit of freedom simultaneously build itself on the backs of those it has so utterly enslaved? The very air changes. The constant burning of wood for warmth, for cooking, for clearing land, fills the sky with smoke, the scent of wood smoke, once a comforting sign of human presence, now hangs heavy in the air, a pervasive reminder of your industrial impact on the landscape. The clear, crisp air you first breathed upon arrival is subtly, but irrevocably, altered. The harshness of laws and punishments did not always deter crime. Sometimes desperation due to hunger or disease drove people to reckless behavior. Sometimes human nature simply could not be restrained by the strictest laws. But these cases only strengthened the resolve of leaders to maintain discipline, believing that tolerance would lead to ruin. Your settlements, initially crude and temporary, grow into more permanent towns and villages. Houses are built with timber and stone, roads are carved through the wilderness, and small workshops and mills begin to appear. The familiar structures of European civilization are slowly, painstakingly, transplanted onto this alien soil. You are not just building homes, you are building a new society, brick by brick, plank by plank, on the bones of the old wilderness. The economic benefits of slavery are undeniable, and they quickly become the driving force behind its expansion. Tobacco, cotton, sugar, the labor-intensive crops of the New World demand a vast, cheap, and controllable workforce. The profits generated by enslaved labor fuel the growth of the colonies, enriching landowners and merchants, and cementing the institution's place in the burgeoning economy. You see the wealth accumulating in the hands of a few, built directly on the suffering of many. The concept of wilderness itself begins to change in your mind. It is no longer just a terrifying unknown. It is a resource, a challenge, a canvas upon which to paint your new world. The fear of the wild is replaced by a determination to conquer it, to bend it to your will, to make it productive and profitable. This shift in perspective is as profound as the physical changes you are enacting upon the land. A little-known detail is the use of stocks and pillories, not only for punishment, but also for re-education. The punished person would be exposed to the public for hours, sometimes all day, with his head and hands clamped down. People were encouraged to throw rotten food or mud at them. The goal was not just to inflict physical pain, but also to publicly humiliate the offender, forcing him to face the judgment of the community and repent of his sins. You might see a neighbor with whom you once shared a meager meal now standing in chains, his face red with shame and anger. You might say to yourself, well, at least I'm not the one hanging there. Historians still debate whether the European approach to land use, with its emphasis on private ownership and intensive agriculture, was inherently destructive, or if it was simply a more efficient way to support a growing population than the indigenous methods. It's a complex question, touching on ecological impact, cultural values, and the very definition of progress. But for you living through it, the changes are simply a matter of survival. One particularly grim common historical fact: the transatlantic slave trade was a massive, brutal enterprise, transporting millions of Africans across the ocean in horrific conditions. The Middle Passage was a journey of unimaginable suffering, with disease, starvation, and violence claiming countless lives. Those who survived arrived in the Americas traumatized and dehumanized, ready to be exploited. You might recall the horrors of your own voyage, And then imagine something infinitely worse. A journey designed not for hopeful settlers, but for human cargo. The indigenous people, who have lived in harmony with this land for millennia, witness these changes with a mixture of bewilderment, anger, and despair. They see their hunting grounds destroyed, their sacred sites desecrated, and their traditional way of life threatened by your relentless expansion. The conflicts that arise are not just over land. They are over fundamentally different philosophies of how humans should interact with the natural world. You lived in a world where individual freedom was severely restricted. The right to live as one wished, to express oneself, was under the control of the community and the church. Everything had to serve a greater purpose, the survival of the colony and the glory of God. You learn to accept this, not because you believe it, but because you understand that it is the price of survival. You see the scars on the landscape, the stumps of ancient trees, the erosion on newly plowed hillsides, the muddied waters of streams near your settlements. These are the marks of your presence, the indelible signature of your civilization on the wild. You might feel a pang of regret, a fleeting sense of loss for the untouched beauty that once was, but it is quickly overshadowed by the practical demands of survival and the relentless march of progress. The moral compromises begin to pile up. You might not own enslaved people yourself, but you benefit from the system. The goods you consume, the economy you participate in, are all intertwined with this brutal institution. You learn to look away, to rationalize, to accept the unacceptable as simply the way things are. The silence of the majority becomes a powerful enabler of the injustice. The introduction of new species, both intentional and unintentional, further reshapes the environment. European weeds, carried inadvertently on your clothing or in your seeds, begin to outcompete native plants. Rats and other vermin, stowaways on your ships, establish themselves in the new world, impacting local ecosystems. The biological landscape, like the physical one, is undergoing a profound and irreversible transformation. You live under a regime where every behavior, from how you worship to how you dress, is tightly controlled. The leaders believe that the colony's prosperity depends on moral purity and strict adherence to religious principles. Any deviation is not just an individual sin, but a threat to the entire community, potentially bringing the wrath of God or the collapse of the social order. The very climate, some argue, might even be subtly affected by the widespread deforestation and agricultural practices. The local weather patterns, the flow of water, the composition of the soil, all are subject to the long-term consequences of your actions. You are not just building a colony, you are conducting a massive, uncontrolled ecological experiment on an entire continent. The forest itself is a bewildering maze. The trees are unlike anything you've seen. Massive, ancient, their roots gnarled and thick. The undergrowth is dense, a tangle of thorny bushes and unfamiliar plants. You quickly realize that navigating this landscape is an art you haven't mastered. Every step is an effort, every path uncertain. The sounds are different too, the rustling of unseen creatures, the hoot of an owl, the distant cry of an animal you can't identify. It's a symphony of the wild, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. You find yourself constantly scanning the shadows, a primal instinct awakening within you. The psychological impact of this transformation is also significant. You are constantly engaged in a battle against nature, a struggle to impose order on chaos. This shapes your character, making you more resilient, more resourceful, but perhaps also more prone to seeing the natural world as something to be dominated, rather than respected. The wildness within you, the part that adapted to the raw demands of survival, also learns to see the land as something to be conquered. The psychological toll on the enslaved is immense. They endure not only physical hardship, but also the constant trauma of separation from family, the loss of culture, and the crushing weight of knowing they are considered property. Yet, despite everything, you witness moments of incredible resilience, quiet acts of defiance, and the enduring strength of their spirit. They find ways to resist, to preserve their culture, to maintain their dignity in the face of overwhelming oppression. You watch the seasons turn, the land responding to your efforts. The corn grows tall in your fields, the cattle graze in your pastures, and the smoke rises from your chimneys. It is a testament to your perseverance, your ingenuity, and your sheer stubbornness. But it is also a testament to the profound and disturbing reality that the new world you are building is fundamentally altering the ancient one that existed before your arrival. Colonial life, under the iron grip of law and order, is a constant struggle, not only with the wild but also with human nature. You have seen those who are broken by the system and others who find strength in conformity. You have learned that survival requires not only physical strength, but also mental fortitude, and the ability to adapt to a world where laws are written in blood and tears. The dream of a pristine Eden, the untouched paradise, has long since faded. In its place is a landscape increasingly shaped by human hands, a testament to both your triumphs and your profound impact. You are not just living in the wilderness, you are actively, relentlessly reshaping it. And as you lay your head down at night, you can almost hear the faint whisper of the ancient trees, sighing as they fall, their voices fading into the new sounds of your burgeoning civilization. You are here, and the land will never be the same. The shadow of chains lengthens across the land, a dark stain on the nascent American dream. The promise of a new beginning, of freedom and opportunity, is irrevocably tainted by the brutal reality of human bondage. You are a witness to this unfolding tragedy, a participant in a society that is building its future on a foundation of profound injustice. And as the years turn into decades, you realize that this institution, once a nascent seed, has taken deep root, intertwining itself with the very fabric of the colonies, creating a legacy that will haunt generations to come. You have reshaped the wild, bending its ancient forests and rivers to your will, creating a new landscape that bears the indelible mark of your presence. You have survived the physical onslaughts of the journey, the land, and disease, and navigated the complex, often brutal social dynamics of your nascent community. But as the physical challenges, immense as they are, become a grim routine, another yet more insidious burden begins to press down upon you. A weight that settles deep in your bones and whispers in the quiet hours of the night the profound, relentless isolation. Corporal punishment was common. Flogging was a regular punishment for a variety of sins, from disobedience to lying. You could hear the crack of the whip and the groans echoing through the settlement from the town square. The scars on some men's backs were silent evidence of times they had broken the rules or were suspected of doing so. You are separated from the world you knew by an immense, unforgiving ocean. Letters, when they arrive, are rare and months old, often bringing news of deaths or changes that feel distant and unreal. The familiar faces of family and friends, the comforting rhythms of English village life, the bustling markets and ancient cathedrals, all are now just fading memories, replaced by the stark reality of this untamed continent. The sense of being utterly cut off, adrift in a vast, unknown expanse, is a constant gnawing ache. You close your eyes, the image of a child being torn from its mother's arms flashing in your mind. The sounds of the whip, the cries of pain, the quiet despair of the enslaved. These are the true sounds of the New World. Sounds that will echo through history. You are here while in this land of both promise and profound cruelty, and you are forced to confront the disturbing reality that the freedom you sought for yourself came at an unimaginable cost to others. The silence here is unlike anything you've ever experienced. In England, even in the countryside, there was always the distant sound of church bells, the lowing of cattle, the chatter of neighbors, the rumble of carts on cobbled roads. Here, beyond the sounds of your own small settlement, there is only the vast, indifferent quiet of the wilderness. The wind whispers through the trees. The distant cry of an animal echoes through the night. But these sounds only serve to emphasize the overwhelming emptiness. You find yourself longing for the comforting cacophony of civilization, for the simple reassurance of human noise. You see children growing up in this environment, who have known no other life. They are born into a world of harshness and discipline, and they grow up to be tough men and women, capable of enduring hardship and obeying the rules. This is the legacy of the early settlers, a society built on resilience, but also on tight control. The lack of news, of information from the wider world, creates a sense of being forgotten. Empires rise and fall, wars are fought, kings are crowned, but you hear only faint, distorted echoes, if anything at all. Your world has shrunk to the confines of your small settlement, your concerns limited to the immediate struggle for survival. The grand narratives of Europe feel utterly irrelevant here, and you, in turn, feel irrelevant to them. You are pioneers, yes, but also exiles, living on the very edge of the known world. You might even joke. I bet the latest fashion in London is still ruffles. Good thing I'm not trying to keep up. You have survived the brutal external forces of the New World, the ocean's fury, the wilderness's embrace, the invisible hand of disease, the gnawing pangs of hunger, and the escalating conflicts with the land's original inhabitants. You have even witnessed the dark stain of chattel slavery begin to spread across this nascent society. Yet, even amidst these overwhelming external pressures, you discover that the greatest threats sometimes come from within. The very community you helped build, the people you shared such profound suffering with, are not a monolithic entity. Discord, suspicion, and power struggles fester beneath the surface, threatening to tear apart the fragile bonds that hold your settlement together. The intellectual stimulation you once took for granted is almost non-existent. There are few books, fewer scholars, and the daily grind leaves little time or energy for contemplation or debate. Your conversations revolve around practical matters: the harvest, the defenses, the health of the community. The rich tapestry of ideas and discussions that characterized the old world is replaced by a stark, pragmatic focus on immediate survival. Your mind, once engaged with broader concepts, begins to narrow, adapting to the brutal simplicity of your new existence. You have survived harsh oceans, brutal winters, invisible diseases, and unrelenting hunger. You have seen the fragile peace with the natives crumble into conflict. Now, as you look around your small settlement, you realize something else. Survival depends not only on fighting off the wilds or external enemies, it also depends on maintaining order within. An order established and maintained with an iron fist and harsh discipline. A less known detail you observe is the way some settlers try to combat this intellectual isolation. You see individuals meticulously copying passages from the few treasured books they brought, or attempting to teach their children to read and write using charcoal on bark. These are quiet, desperate acts to preserve a connection to the world of letters and learning, a defiant stand against the encroaching intellectual wilderness. It's a poignant reminder that, even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit yearns for more than mere survival. You might have imagined that shared hardship would forge an unbreakable unity, that common goals would override petty differences. But human nature, it turns out, is a stubborn thing, even in the face of existential threats. The close quarters, the constant stress, the scarcity of resources, these factors amplify every minor disagreement, every personality clash, turning small grievances into simmering resentments. You find yourself walking on eggshells, carefully choosing your words as the atmosphere within the settlement grows increasingly tense. The emotional toll of isolation is profound. You miss your loved ones, not just their physical presence, but the comfort of shared history, of understanding glances, of familiar jokes. The people around you, though your companions in hardship, are often strangers, or people with whom you share only the most superficial connections. You carry your griefs, your fears, and your unspoken longings largely alone, for there is little space for emotional vulnerability in a world that demands constant strength. You have overcome much, and you now understand that to survive here, you must accept a life shaped by the iron hand of order. It is not an easy life, but it is the only life you have. And when you close your eyes at night, you hear the wind whistling through the rough wooden walls of your home, a reminder of the fragility of life and the need for rules, however harsh, to keep it all from falling apart. You are still here, still alive, still obeying. You have endured the perilous voyage, the brutal welcome of the wilderness, the invisible enemy of disease, and the gnawing embrace of hunger. You have lived under the iron fist of strict laws, a system designed to maintain order in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. As your small settlement slowly, painfully expands, clearing more land, building more permanent structures, you begin to witness the insidious growth of a practice that will forever stain the promise of this new world, the institution of chattel slavery. The lack of social outlets, of entertainment, of simple pleasures, contributes to the pervasive sense of loneliness. There are no taverns, no theaters, no public festivals. Your leisure time, if you have any, is spent in quiet contemplation or in simple, shared tasks. The joy that once came from communal celebration is replaced by a grim determination to endure. You learn to find small comforts in the natural world, in the beauty of a sunset, or the quiet rustling of leaves. But these are solitary pleasures. Religious differences, ironically, are a major source of friction, even among those who fled persecution. While many came seeking religious freedom, they often sought it for themselves, not for others. Your particular sect or denomination might hold sway, but those with slightly different interpretations of Scripture, or who practice their faith in a subtly different way, are viewed with suspicion, even hostility. Quakers, Baptists, Anglicans. Puritans, each group believes they hold the purest truth, and deviation is often seen as heresy, a direct threat to the spiritual well-being of the entire community. You might hear someone grumble. Honestly, you'd think God had a favorite brand of hat, given how much they argue about it. The common historical fact of the high rates of mental distress and melancholy among early settlers is often overlooked. The constant stress, the trauma of loss, and the profound isolation contributed to widespread depression, anxiety, and other psychological ailments. There was little understanding of mental health, and even less capacity to address it, leaving many to suffer in silence. Fornication and adultery were especially harshly punished. In a society based on marriage and family, any violation of moral codes is seen as a serious threat. Punishment can include public flogging, being forced to wear the letter A adultery on one's clothing, or even banishment from the community, a death sentence in such a savage land. You see outcasts living in shame and isolation, a grim reminder of the cost of transgression, the fear of the unknown, of the vast, untamed wilderness that surrounds your small outpost, also contributes to the isolation. Every journey beyond the immediate confines of the settlement is fraught with peril, making travel rare and dangerous. You are effectively confined to your small patch of cleared land, a tiny island in an ocean of trees. This physical confinement reinforces the psychological sense of being cut off from the rest of humanity. You witness public debates, often turning into heated arguments, over theological points that seem utterly arcane in the face of daily survival. Is infant baptism truly necessary? Should church leadership be elected or appointed? These questions, seemingly minor, can ignite passionate divisions, leading to excommunications, public shaming, and even banishment. Those deemed heretics or dissenters are forced to leave the settlement, cast out into the unforgiving wilderness, a fate almost as grim as death itself. This common historical fact, the intense religious intolerance within many early American colonies, despite their founding on principles of religious freedom, is a stark paradox. You might find yourself talking to yourself more often, or confiding in an animal, or even a tree. The need for conversation, for an outlet for your thoughts and feelings, becomes desperate. You cling to any new arrival, any snippet of news, has a lifeline to the world you left behind. The arrival of a new family, even if they are strangers, brings a brief surge of hope, a momentary easing of the loneliness. You might even find yourself saying, well, at least the squirrels are good listeners. After a particularly long, silent day, it begins subtly, perhaps with a few individuals brought over on ships, not as indentured servants with a finite term of service, but as something else entirely. Their skin is darker, their language unfamiliar, and their circumstances utterly desperate. They are brought from distant lands, across another vast and terrifying ocean, not by choice, but by force. You see them disembark, bewildered and terrified, their eyes reflecting a profound despair that mirrors and yet far surpasses your own experiences on the transatlantic journey. The absence of familiar social structures and support networks leaves you feeling vulnerable and exposed. There are no extended families to lean on, no established institutions to provide comfort or guidance beyond the rigid church and governing body. You are forced to rely almost entirely on your own inner resources and on the strength of your immediate, often struggling, household. This self-reliance, while a source of pride, is also a heavy burden. Beyond religion, personal rivalries and power struggles are a constant undercurrent. The leaders, often self-appointed or chosen through a rudimentary form of election, have wield immense authority. Their decisions impact every aspect of your life, from land distribution to legal judgments. But power, as you well know, corrupts. You see factions forming, alliances shifting, as individuals jockey for influence and control. Whispers of favoritism, corruption, and abuse of power circulate through the community, eroding trust in those who govern. Historians still debate whether the psychological resilience of early settlers was primarily due to their strong religious faith, their innate toughness, or simply the lack of any alternative. It's a complex interplay of personal fortitude and grim necessity. But for you, living through it, it feels like a constant battle against despair, a daily act of choosing to put one foot in front of the other. Church services are mandatory. You sit in hard wooden pews, listening to lengthy sermons, often lasting hours, with stern warnings of sin and damnation. Absence without a valid excuse can result in heavy penalties, sometimes fines, sometimes public floggings. You must maintain a solemn demeanor, no talking, no napping. Even an inappropriate smile could be considered disrespectful. You might see a neighbor being reprimanded for not sitting up straight, or a child having his ears pinched for fidgeting too much. The dream of creating a perfect, harmonious society, free from the corruptions of the old world, slowly gives way to the grim reality of human fallibility and the crushing weight of circumstance. The ideal of community, so central to the Puritan vision, is constantly tested by the pressures of isolation and survival. You realize that even in a new world, human beings carry their old problems, and the greatest struggles are often fought within the confines of one's own mind. You might find yourself caught in the middle of these disputes. Perhaps your neighbor, a seemingly pious man, is accused of hoarding resources during a lean season, or a respected elder is rumored to have made a questionable land deal. You are forced to choose sides, or to remain silent and risk being seen as disloyal. The pressure to conform, to align with the dominant faction, is immense. Speaking out against the powerful can lead to social ostracization, economic ruin, or even accusations of sedition. You look at the faces of your fellow settlers, etched with lines of hardship and a quiet weariness. You see the same isolation in their eyes, the same unspoken longing for something lost. You are all in this together, yet profoundly alone. The shared experience of suffering creates a bond, but it is a bond tempered by the knowledge that each person must ultimately face their own demons in the vast, silent expanse of this new land. Initially, the distinction between an indentured servant and a slave might seem blurred to your European eyes. Both are bound to labor. Both are subject to the will of a master. But you quickly learn the crucial difference. An indentured servant, though their life is hard and their freedom delayed, has a contract, a fixed term of service, after which they will be free. The people you now see arriving, however, have no such contract. They are bound for life, and their children, and their children's children, will inherit their bondage. This common historical fact, the gradual shift from indentured servitude to lifelong hereditary slavery, is a critical, often overlooked development in early colonial history. The passage of time itself becomes a strange, distorted thing. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months, marked only by the turning of the seasons and the relentless cycle of labor. The future, once a bright beacon of hope, now stretches out as an endless, arduous path, filled with more challenges, more losses, and the persistent, quiet hum of isolation. A less-known detail you observe is the prevalence of petty lawsuits and accusations, often over seemingly trivial matters. A dispute over a stray pig, a boundary line encroaching by a few inches, or a perceived insult can escalate into formal legal proceedings, consuming valuable time and energy. These legal battles, often presided over by untrained magistrates, highlight the deep-seated mistrust and litigiousness that permeated early colonial life. It's almost like everyone had a personal grievance app, constantly updating their beef status. You think of the simple comforts of the old world, a warm fire in a busy inn, the laughter of children playing in a village square, the familiar scent of blooming flowers in a cultivated garden. These memories are precious, but they are also painful, highlighting the stark contrast with your current reality. You cling to them, however, for they are a vital link to the person you once were, to the world you left behind. Even children are not exempt from strict supervision. They are taught to obey their parents and elders. Naughtiness, lying, or disobedience can result in severe physical punishment. The goal is to mold them into obedient, pious citizens capable of enduring hardship and obeying the rules. Childhood here has little room for play or carefreeness. Historians still debate whether the harshness of early colonial laws was a necessary response to the fragility of the new settlements, or whether they reflected an authoritarian European social and religious ideology. It's a complex question, one that involves the balance between survival and individual liberty. The psychological landscape of the early American settler is as rugged and unforgiving as the physical one. It is a landscape shaped by loss, by fear, by unrelenting pressure, and by the profound, pervasive sense of being utterly alone in a vast, indifferent world. You are a survivor, yes, but your survival comes with a heavy spiritual cost, a deep-seated melancholy that will forever be a part of who you are. The scarcity of resources fuels much of this internal discord. Land, food, tools. Everything is limited, and the distribution of these vital necessities is a constant source of tension. Those who feel they are not receiving their fair share, or who believe others are taking advantage, voice their complaints, sometimes loudly, sometimes through passive-aggressive acts. You see resentment simmering in the eyes of those who feel overlooked, their contributions undervalued. As night falls and the last embers of the fire glow faintly in your crude dwelling, you pull your blanket tighter around you. The sounds of the wilderness press in, the rustling of unseen creatures, the distant hoot of an owl. You close your eyes, and in the profound darkness, you are left with your thoughts, your memories, and the quiet, persistent weight of your isolation. You are here, alone in the vastness, and the silence is deafening. You witness the first sales, grim spectacles in the nascent marketplace. Human beings are paraded, inspected like livestock, their bodies assessed for strength and endurance. Families are torn apart, husbands separated from wives, children from parents, with a casual indifference that chills you to the bone. The cries of anguish, though in a foreign tongue, are universally understood, a testament to the brutal dehumanization at play. You might try to rationalize it, to tell yourself that these people are different, that their circumstances are beyond your control. But the image of a mother's desperate plea as her child is sold away will haunt your sleep. You might even hear someone just, well, at least they won't complain about the hardtack. A joke that falls flat in the grim reality. Social stratification, though perhaps less rigid than in England, quickly emerges. Those who arrived with more wealth, more connections, or more skills naturally assume positions of greater influence. The indentured servants, though they dream of freedom, remain at the bottom of this nascent social ladder, often exploited and abused. The enslaved, of course, are outside the social structure entirely, their very humanity denied. This creates a complex web of resentments and aspirations, further complicating the internal dynamics. The dream of a bountiful new world, a land flowing with milk and honey, has been replaced by the stark reality of a constant, desperate struggle for survival. You are no longer chasing an ideal, you are simply trying to stay alive, to feed your family, to keep your small community from succumbing to the relentless gnawing of hunger. And as the seasons turn and the threat of famine looms once more, you prepare yourself for another round in this brutal, unending fight. You're still here, still hungry, still fighting. The role of women in this society is strictly defined, primarily within the domestic sphere. Yet, even within these confines, tensions arise. Accusations of witchcraft, often directed at women who are outspoken, independent, or simply eccentric, become a terrifying manifestation of social control and fear. You witness the hysteria, the baseless accusations, and the tragic consequences for those caught in its grip. The fear of the unknown, of the devil's influence, can turn neighbor against neighbor with terrifying speed.